Hi, it's the girl out there right here with you. It's me, Cindy. And this week we are here with Jeff Smith. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Cindy. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. I think this is so exciting because you and I have known each other for 30 years.
Wow. Oh boy, that's scary. That really, yeah, that aged to the both of us right now
I
instantly.
know. I know. I'm going to say it's going to age you more than me because I feel like I'm still 13.
I can't share that same feeling, Cindy. So you went on that one.
I know. So I'll say a little bit about the two of us, and we met in grade 8, right?
Great.
And crazy. And your wife is in the background, and I'm just going to mention her because I love her too. And so we all went to high school together, and which is, I still joke about it that you were on the football team and I was the football manager.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And the good old days. And now what's so great and so amazing is that our boys are dear friends and also play football
In
together
football. I know.
at the same high school.
So crazy. It is so weird. And I was driving home from what we're talking about, football. I was driving home from Seattle yesterday. We had a football tournament in Seattle, and I was thinking about that. Thinking about today and going, how great is that we met in a high school, friends in high school, and now today I'm going to be on your show and talking to you, having this great conversation. So yeah, super weird, but great. It's yeah, from all different angles. I think
Totally.
it's yeah.
I know. I love it.
Those
So Jeff, I asked you to be on here because and I will tell you, people who know me and this podcast, I cry very easily. So at some point I might cry today, and just bear with me, look the other way, cough,
no, crying is
what.
good. Crying is good. Yeah.
um, but your story, I feel, is so important, and one that'll reach many. And as soon as I saw you had posted something on, or Leanne had your wife had posted something, and I had not realized what you had been going through, and it just immediately hit me, and I just was like, I need to talk to Jeff. So I don't know where you want to start, how you want to start, just dive in, share a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, Cindy, I really appreciate you having me on the show to tell my story, because I think it's a great opportunity to connect with people that might be suffering or might be going through the similar experience that I went through, and that's my motivation behind what I'm doing now, and so I really appreciate this opportunity to be here and speaking to you, and speaking to Cindy, an old friend, right? So this is really great. I appreciate it. So Cindy, as you know, I spent the better part of 20 years working as a paramedic in the Lower Mainland. People have asked me, why did you become a paramedic? And I don't know if it's something that I always wanted to do, but I came from a family of first responders. As you know, Leanne's a police officer. My brother-in-law is a fire chief on the North Shore. My mom was a nurse. So I didn't know what I wanted to do early on, but I knew that I wanted to help people. And so out of high school, I was working on a golf course, and an opportunity came up to be a first aid attendant, and I took a first aid course, and I was kind of hooked. I went, how do I build upon this? What can I do with this now? I need to get into a career. I think I was still living at home at that time, and bumming off mom and dad. And it was time to get out of the house and get into a career. And I was driving by a Lions Gate Hospital, of all things, and on the North Shore, and saw a couple of guys cleaning up the stretcher. And I went up to them and I said, hey guys, what's the deal with becoming a paramedic? What do you need to do? And they said, well, why don't you come out with us tonight and do a ride along? And I was hooked, Cindy. It was right off the bat. They were doing all sorts of great stuff, helping people, running red lights, getting to play with the sirens and all that kind of stuff. So I went, this seems like a cool job. And I dove right into it. So that's kind of how I started. And I don't know if the general public, know some of the challenges that paramedics especially face with early on in their career. But in British Columbia, the service is a provincial ambulance service. And when you start, it's takes a number of years to get full time. So it took me, I knew I had about 5 years till I got full time. And you can only work full time in the city in Vancouver early on. So So for the first 5 years, I bounced around the province. I was on Galliano. Have you ever been to Galliano Island, Cindy? No, so Galliano Island, like one of the Gulf Islands. So that was my first station, which is so bizarre. So I would commute there um, on the weekends to go over there and work part time. Uh, uh, and in between that, we're trying to make a living. So I'm putting in shifts to other stations, working back to back shifts, doing what I can to sort of make a living. So it's very much like a hustle, as I described. I was hustling for the first 5 years, and I mentioned this as I'm a paramedic instructor, so I'm really passionate about teaching students mental health. But when I started, there wasn't anything about mental health. We didn't talk about what you did if you saw or you felt something after a call. That just did not exist. I was trained very well to deal with any kind of medical emergency in the pre-hospital setting. I was well prepared for that, but I wasn't prepared for things that I would see throughout my career. And I relate, now that we were talking about high school, Cindy, starting the ambulance was kind of like starting high school. Like in grade 8, I was very much new at this career, didn't know a lot of people, didn't know what the cultural norms were. And I sort of modeled my behavior from some of the paramedics that I thought were strong paramedics, people that were stoic, that didn't talk about how they felt after a call. So, and I knew that when these people did talk about calls was typically after the shift at the bar. We had, a lot of good friends. We'd go out after and drink, and that's when we would talk about these calls. So that became one of my coping mechanisms early on, good or bad, but that's how I dealt with some of the challenges and stresses that I faced early on.
So you would go after to a bar all together and just sort of debrief. And
yeah,
would you
like
seeing horrible things? Just so what?
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that every shift is like that as a paramedic, but there would be shifts where you would see some really horrific things. And it seemed like the people that I was looking up to did so after work, and they did so when they were drinking. And you seem to have this bond with the people that you worked with, and that you sort of immersed yourself in that. And that became one of my coping mechanisms early. So after 5 years, I finally got full time in Vancouver. And this is when I started to notice that maybe the coping mechanisms and strategies that I had developed to deal with some of these situations were starting to fail on me. So in 2007, and I hope you don't mind, I'm going to share some information that might be a little bit triggering for those, but I think it's important just to be transparent about what I was going through. So in 2007, there was a gangland shooting in Vancouver where 6 people were shot, and I responded to that call, and I had never seen anything like that before in my life. These are things that you see on TV and movies and that sort of thing. And I'd never experienced anything like that. And I remember going through that situation and really feeling like it was like I wasn't there, like I was sort of disassociated with that situation. And I remember looking around and seeing my coworkers working in that scene where, there was multiple people that had been shot and critically injured, and they were just all doing their job. And I was blown away that we were in this horrific situation and people were acting normally or doing their jobs like they were trained to do. Like there was no one crying or screaming or throwing up because things were horrific. They really were. But I looked around and I went, this is so bizarre. There's this horrific scene where another human being has done this to somebody else, and all these people are just doing their job like they were trained to do. And I struggled with that. I remember driving home after that shift and really feeling like, people have talked about moral injuries that people experience. And I really felt that. I felt that I could not believe that another human being would erase somebody's lives, multiple people's lives like that. And didn't matter who these people were or the bad things that they'd done. I struggled with that. So my coping mechanisms to drink became something that I started to do on my own. And I started to isolate myself because every time I would think about these, I would go over and over that scene in that restaurant and feel and the feelings, what it felt like to be in that restaurant and experience that is something that I kept thinking about over and over again. And I found that drinking at the time helped with that. And so this became sort of thing that I began to do on my own and sort of pull away from my family and friends. And yeah, I was getting lost in alcohol, and still, I think I was functioning fairly well at that point. I was, going to work, and we were starting, Leanne and I had started to have kids. I think Ethan at that age, Brady was born, Brady and Ethan, right? Brady, yeah. So, young kids at home, and struggling, stressful that is, Cindy. And,
Yes.
you have two boys, and so we share that as well too. But,
Did
so
you
trying to
have,
manage.
sorry, did
Yeah,
you also, were you seeing a therapist or anything at that point, or you just, that was not something?
no, no. And the reason why, Cindy, is good. I'm glad you asked that, because why would I see a therapist?
Mhm.
My job is to show up and put my emotions aside to do my job. That is part of my job. That's my job requirement.
Right,
So why would I admit that there's anything wrong with me, right? Because that would be admitting that I can't do the job,
right,
right? And that very is a stigma that still exists. It's a cultural norm, because these jobs require people to act normal in situations that are completely abnormal.
right,
So it's very challenging to put your hand up and say, you know what, I can't do my job today. And,
right.
and because you're in fear of being judged that way. So I struggled with that as things were starting to fall apart. In 2009, this drinking had sort of taken on a mind of its own at this point, and I'm starting to notice that, I'm pulling away from definitely from my relationship with Leanne, and our marriage is going through some real challenges. We got young kids at home, and then I'm rocked by this. It was in 2009. It was my last shift before I went on holidays. I was looking forward to going to Hawaii with my parents, with our family, my sister, and all that. Looking forward to that. Anyways, my last shift. Halfway through our shift, one of the greatest experience that you'll ever experience as a paramedic, being part of a birth was really. I had an opportunity to be part of delivering twins, a
Mm.
17-year-old girl in the downtown east side, and so I was part of this wonderful experience of delivering these twin babies. And the very next call was for a 2-year-old girl that unfortunately was run over by a tow truck and died instantly, and her mother was critically injured. And that, being part of that, and where I was in my state of my coping mechanisms, and my supports that I thought were really strong, that sort of tipped me over the edge. And that's when I became a daily, drinker. I couldn't handle the hypervigilance. I couldn't handle the intrusive thoughts, and dealing with that. And I had a 2-year-old son at home, so I very much struggled with that, just being part of that whole scene, and struggling with the nightmares and the flashbacks. And so I got lost in alcohol, and I completely isolated myself, and I drank, and it was something that I did from the moment I got up to the moment I went to sleep. I used prescription drugs to try to sleep at night, and it just became this Groundhog Day of the same thing over and over again.
And were you still working at the same time?
Yeah. So I was starting to miss work at this point. I'm starting to call in sick, and just because I didn't want to face that
Right,
anymore, right?
of course.
So Leanne had said, "Listen, our marriage is falling apart. Why don't we at least go see a marriage counselor?" Well,
Right,
I was open to that, because I knew that this had nothing to do with. I was trying to put this as if it didn't have anything to do with what I had dealt with at work.
right,
Maybe it's our marriage that's the problem. Maybe it's somebody else that
right.
is the problem. So this marriage counselor took one look at us and said, "Listen, Jeff, I think you need to see a trauma therapist. I think there's some more stuff going on." And she did, and she put me in touch with a psychologist, and that was the first time that I'd ever heard like a diagnosis of PTSD. And
Right.
so I did get the help. It sort of streamlined, and I was able to get the help that I needed at that point. I got myself sober. I've been sober for 12 years. You know, we went through some exposure therapy, and it sort of helped. It sort of, but I
What's
felt
exposure therapy?
Well, and that's the challenge. And we'll speak maybe a little bit more
Okay,
to that in a sec.
sure.
But I do want to touch base on that. Like exposure
Yeah,
therapy, so is one of the treatment modalities for PTSD. There's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's exposure therapy, and that would be sort of giving you some tools and skill set as you're going over that experience again and talking about it and feeling it, but giving you some tools to deal with the uncomfortable symptoms as you're going through that. And so
right.
eventually that becomes you desensitized to that situation. And I found that challenging because you'd have to talk about it and go over the images again. And I struggled with that, but I did seem to get better. I developed some really good coping mechanisms. I got into exercise and I took up woodworking, which is like super random because Cindy, I was never in high school. I was never into woodworking or anything like that. I was like,
So
not
that's
even
how
up my alley. Super
but
random.
that's how you developed all of the stuff you create now?
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about like an addict going from abusing alcohol to woodworking. That's all I did on my days off. So instead of drinking, I started woodworking, and it was great. It was kind of funny because I'd be the guy at the station. They called me like the Pinterest guy. So I'd be like the Martha Stewart at the station, like going, oh, what project am I going to do next, right, on my days off? So, but
I
that
love
became, so it became my new passion, and it was great. It's a healthy
Yes.
alternative to what I was doing. So
Yeah.
I dove into that. But as you know, with teenagers, and I'm going to relate what I was going through in this moment in my career to me being a teenager, I felt like my mental health was behind me. This PTSD is something that did not exist anymore, nor did I need to ever address it again. And I don't need to get in touch with that. This is something that I've very much behind me. I'm not going to tell anyone at work that I went through. There's no way in hell that I'm going to tell anyone that I went through that. And I'm just going to get back to life. That is something behind me. I was a little speed bump, and things are good now. And things were fairly good. I went on the next 10 years of my career. I had a great partner who's now one of my best friends. But but we've the volume of exposure to suffering. I worked in the downtown east side for the last couple of years. Prior to that, in Surrey, sort of the beginning of the opioid pandemic, and so it just became a volume of exposure and volume of being exposed to suffering and death and those kind of things. And I didn't start noticing things were wrong until it was almost too late for me. We were dealing in 2019 with a girl that had, sorry to share this again, but a girl that had been run over by a tow truck, a 13-year-old girl, and I was under the truck, and everything came back to me. It was like I was back in 2009, all the same sounds and feelings and yeah, it froze me in a moment where I didn't even know what to do. I was underneath this truck trying to help this girl. And anyways, I managed to get through the call, but I noticed from that night on that I started to have the nightmares again and the flashbacks again. And I started to, for the first time ever, I'd never thought about, suicide or anything like that, but I was feeling so depressed that this was back. I didn't know how to speak about it. I didn't know who to tell, who to talk about it. My partner, who's one of my best friends, appeared to be doing fine, and I felt a challenge, like to say anything to him. How am I going to tell him that I'm struggling? And so I began to isolate myself again, and eventually I ended up taking some time off work and getting into a program for first responders that have dealt with PTSD. It was a wonderful program, but I went through this 10-week program, and when I came out, still struggling with the nightmares and flashbacks, and now starting to get these thoughts of suicide. And Cindy, I feel kind of hopeless at this point. I feel like I've done a lot of the treatments for PTSD. I've just gone through this 2-month treatment program. There's psychologists there. There's dietitians. There was all sorts of. I felt like I'd done a lot of work, and I'm still struggling with these flashbacks and nightmares. And that's when people talk about being hopeless and not having. I was losing hope, or I'd lost hope. Right. So my days kind of became consumed with, how am I going to get out of this? how am I going to end this suffering? And it led to me thinking about, okay, I need to kill myself. I can't do this anymore. And so I've talked and sort of joked to people about this. You would think as a paramedic who's attended, multiple suicides that I would know how to end my life. And I didn't. That's what I spent days kind of thinking about. And then February 16th, 2019, actually prior to that, on the 15th, I drove to the Lionsgate Bridge. I drove and I parked my car underneath the bridge and I just sat there and I was trying to figure out if I could get the nerve to get up onto that bridge deck and end the suffering. And so I didn't. I got scared that night. I drove home, and the next day was another sleepless night, and things weren't going right, and I felt terrible. I felt low. I dropped my son Ethan off at the gym, and at this time I felt like, you know what, the only way out of here is this option. And I felt committed to the plan. I drove to Park Royal, parked my car, walked up on the bridge deck. I remember, I was crying, walking past this. There's a man I walk past, and I get up and I'm over the railing at this point. And it's, and I've talked about this before, and it's like one of these scariest, saddest moments in your life, but it became the most peaceful moment in my life. It became this like beautiful Vancouver night, and the lights, I remember everything. And I remember finally feeling in control. Like I'd never, I'd spent like these last 10, 12 years of feeling completely out of control. Now I was in control. Now I could end the suffering. And, and so I'm having this kind of moment, and I can hear in the distance, I can hear sirens coming in, and I'm no sort of correlation that this might be for me. And so before I know it, there's a police officer like right next to the railing with me, and she's trying her best to talk to me. And thank God she did, because she managed to say something that was able to get me over the railing. And I was apprehended with Vancouver police and taken to St. Paul's to get some help. So but Cindy, like I had been on that bridge deck with so many people in those moments, and I tried to empathize with them and understand what they were going through, but I really didn't until I was in that situation. I don't know if there's anything you can say to somebody in those moments that would, but yeah, I
Do you know what the words were that she said?
no, but I do remember something that was amazing that night. So it's just policy. You have to be put in handcuffs and in the back of a police car. It's very cold going from this moment where you're like complete control to now being, you've lost control again, right? So It's this moment of like, and then I was, frustrated and sad. Anyways, that my wife's Leanne's one of her former partners works for Vancouver Police now, and he heard this call go over the radio. I guess my name got mentioned, and what I did, someone, I don't know how they did, but they found out that I was a paramedic. It was Jeff Smith. And Carlos heard this, and he drove to the scene, and he just came up, and I know we're not supposed to do this to people, but he hugged me and he just said, "Jeff, I love you." And it was one of the greatest, like, I'll never forget that. Like anything that anyone said to me that night, I'll just, the way he made me feel in that moment, like I felt human again. I didn't feel like this. Because there's a lot of like, as I was driving, or as I was coming off the bridge, there was people driving by, saying horrible things. Like, and I hate the fact that this is, this even, like people were saying things like, "Why don't you just jump? Like, how dare you hold up traffic?" Those kind of things. So it was so nice to feel human again, and to have that connection in that moment.
Yeah.
It meant everything. It meant so much. So I was taken to the hospital, and I spent, that was a whole experience in itself, is to be on the other side of it. I mean, this is a hospital that I worked at, brought patients to in a similar situation as me. And now I'm the patient. And so that was a different experience. But I got out of the hospital, and things And that's kind of been, that was 14 months ago, and what I've been able to do now has been really cool. So
Now,
um,
thank you, Jeff, for being so vulnerable to share that. Thank you.
oh, I
And
appreciate it.
sorry.
No, and I'm sorry. I hope I didn't. Yeah.
Um, I'm just curious, had you spoken with Leanne leading up to that? Like, did Leanne know that I just am thinking of Leanne on the other side. Was she was she blown away that that had happened? Was she thinking that maybe this was a possibility?
Yeah, I don't think I ever really told Leanne how other than I felt so low. I felt
Right,
down, and I don't think Leanne knew how low I felt. People have asked me, I had friends that said, why didn't you call me in that moment? Why, Jeff, you
right,
could have called me. I didn't want to call anyone. I didn't want to
right,
burden anyone. I felt so isolated. I wanted out of here. I was committed to ending, and I didn't want to burden anyone and tell anyone.
right.
So, I know I probably hurt people. I know friends that, kind of felt like, hey, like, if I was your close friend, why don't you call me? You can call me for that. And it wasn't a case of that. It was just, I didn't want to burden anyone. I didn't want anyone to know, and those kind of things. So,
Yeah,
yeah, and that is a challenge with people that feel in that state, is to getting them to talk, getting them to
yeah,
share those feelings, right?
yeah,
That's a challenge. So,
yes,
that's yeah. So what's interesting is I get out of the hospital, and I hope you don't mind. Can you'll share in
yeah,
the rest of it? Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So I
Keep
get
going.
out of the hospital, and I'm like, what now? The hell am I going to do now? I can't be a paramedic anymore. I feel like that ship has sailed. I definitely know it's like really led to some dark moments in my life, and I need to think about something else. And now this is, I've gone, oh, what am I going to tell people? Um, and the thought of doing any more kind of counseling or something is just, I don't want to speak to anyone anymore. I'm fed up. My sister actually knows a therapist, and you're gonna laugh when you hear his name. His name's Stephen King. But so Amy goes, Jeff, I want you to speak to Steve King. And I go, yeah, okay, you got to be kidding. So she goes, just try it. So anyways, I think Cindy, you and I were talking about this before, but what was great is that Steve said, why don't we do a Zoom session? It's been one of the most amazing things that have come out of this pandemic, is being able to remotely do some of these therapies and meetings and all that kind of stuff. Because I hated going to doctor's office. I hated being in the waiting room with people that you know, I couldn't relate to. So I'm, in my house immediately. I go, okay, well, like that. If I don't need to go see him, if you can just like, you can do this in my house, sure, let's have a conversation. And so after our first session, Steve introduced me to this treatment modality, totally different than I'd ever done before. And it didn't involve me having to tell a story. It didn't involve any exposure therapy. It didn't have to go over the details. And we went through this, his treatment modality that he's developed. He's been working in the field of addictions and trauma for the last 30 years. And we know that addictions and trauma are very much integrated. So Steve introduced me to this treatment modality that uses energy psychology. It uses some acupressure points. And he urged me to be skeptical. And after the first session, I did notice a shift. I was sleeping through the nights. The nightmares and flashbacks were gone. And I had now this skill set to help navigate some of the challenges, because I don't think that PTSD ever really goes away. I think that you sort of have some lingering images and thoughts, but you have developed a skill set to help deal with those, how your nervous system reacts in those situations.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so now I very much had a skill set to help, which I didn't before. I'd done all these types of therapies, but there wasn't anything about, what do you do after? What about the post-traumatic growth after? So now I had this skill set, and it's very much, we were having this conversation a few weeks after. I was having a conversation with Steve, and he said, looking at your future, what are some things that you want to do? What are, like, goal setting and that sort of thing. So I had always said that I would love to be able to help others out. I was still very much, I love that part about being a paramedic, helping people out. I loved having conversations with people, connecting with people. So I still wanted to do that. And I felt like I could really wanted to help others out that might be going through a similar situation as me. So we started this nonprofit organization. That's what we've been kind of spending these 14 months on, is trying to get education resources out to first responders that are dealing with PTSD. And because I don't believe there's enough support, and I really don't believe there's enough awareness about it. So yeah, that's been our focus.
So I mean, I think it's incredible. I
Yeah.
think, I think really, like I've said to you, even in my work, which I think it is quite a little similar to what he is doing. But what I've found for myself is, and I work with men, and sometimes they don't want to share they're working with me, which is totally fine. But I've heard a lot of people that have post-traumatic stress, and some who are first responders. And that this work they find too with energy, where they did not want to believe it at the beginning, and suddenly they said, this actually does work. It's incredible. So what is it that you're like, can you go into a little bit further with what it is that you're doing? Like,
Yeah, I think that almost the best person to be would be Steve to explain the technique, but I can give you an overview of what it sort of
yeah,
involves. And it's interesting that you mentioned energy, and I think we hear the word, maybe there's a bit of a stigma associated with the word energy, and people think, okay, this might be way too
yeah,
out there for me.
yeah,
But let's think about energy in terms of post-traumatic stress, which I think there's a tremendous amount of energy. You're dealing with symptoms that involve hypervigilance, anxiety. So you're constantly, as we would say with a patient, sympathetically stimulated. You have adrenaline that's constantly being pushed through your body. So as a matter of fact, we give adrenaline in patients in cardiac arrest when their heart has stopped, to try to get that heart to beat again faster. So you can imagine how powerful this chemical is in your body, and the amount of energy that is created. So the detachment technique very much focuses on that, is being able to release some of that energy. And so using some of these meridian points, using a combination of EFT, using tapping, also, there's accelerated information processing. So there's some acupressure points that we use in going through. You don't have to say anything about the call or the experience or whatever it may be, but it's very much you going through that on your own and using acupressure to help calm your nervous system in that moment. It gives you a sort of a skill set to deal with some of the daily stresses that we face. Like as a parent, Cindy, these teenage years, oh my, like it's unbelievable. I use this technique for myself in those moments
yeah,
when it's stressful, it's challenging, right?
yeah,
I think that, and I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here. I look at curriculum and what kids learn in school, and I wish that our kids learned how their minds and bodies reacted to stress at an early age, because I don't think we would see the level of people suffering with anxiety and these different disorders that we're seeing as a result of that. People don't know how to react to stress and
yeah.
what to do in those situations, and it's a challenge. I think that should be part of our curriculum. I think we should be teaching our children early.
Totally. I just think, like, listening to all of it, where like knowing how you say, no, that this is this is not normal situation, and I have to remove myself, and all the things that you just thought you had to do. I know, even for myself, totally unrelated to what you've had to do on an everyday basis, but I remember I was at the Lynn Valley shooting or
Yeah,
situation
yeah,
last year,
yeah.
and I witnessed it all. And I remember when I left it, I got in my car, I called my mom, and I was almost at a state of, she says, I don't actually remember calling her, because I just saw so much. And then I froze almost, because I couldn't understand what this man was doing in front of me. And then all these everybody there. And I got in my car and I just said, she said, I was almost hysterical laughing, like, I just saw this. And it took me about 3 hours to come to a regular state. And then it was 2 days later, I was walking down Lonsdale and two ambulances drove by me and I ducked into
Wow.
a side underneath and I just started bawling.
Holy smokes. Wow.
Which just shows you, and then I just couldn't relate it all together, but then it did make sense, I guess, in my mind. Like, it's almost like then it was like a bit of PTSD, like
Yeah.
fast. I was like, oh, and then it all just sort of, then I was able to grieve what I had seen at the Lynn Valley space. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, there was a
Yeah.
mass thing that occurred, for those who are listening in
Yeah.
other areas of not North
Yeah.
Vancouver. But so I just think for you to have had years and years of that, and seeing these things and then not being able to process those and understand them, right? I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Cindy. And honestly, I can't imagine what you went through and how horrific that must have been, right? Uh, that's the problem is exactly what you said, is that as an instructor, I teach paramedics, and I feel negligent telling people that you really you have to put your emotions aside to do the job.
Yeah,
You couldn't
you couldn't.
walk in and start crying or
No.
or running away, which is a total normal reaction to
Yes.
some of these things. So it is backwards what we're doing. And what we're starting to see is that people are suffering because of it, because exactly what you're saying, they don't get that opportunity to release that energy.
Yes.
You very much use the analogy of predator versus prey in the wild. If you've ever watched a deer get away from its predator, if it manages to get away, it'll sit there and shake. And that's
Yeah.
that adrenaline going through the body. So it gets an
Yes.
opportunity to release that. When do you do that as a first responder? When you're doing 15, 20 calls a shift, when do you get a chance to release that energy? And
Because
that's
you're doing exactly what we're not supposed to. You're going towards the danger.
right. Yeah, that's great. And it is like, and I understand, and people have said that, well, you chose that career, and and I've had people say that, maybe you should do something else. But it's not human to do what these people are doing. And I think, people have asked, what would you like the general public to know? And I think that's important to know, is that we're asking them to do stuff that's not human. Like, it
Yes.
really is. And I think that there's some challenges. Now with this COVID-19 pandemic, you can see the healthcare workers that are struggling,
Yeah.
right? Because we've asked them to do more than is humanly possible, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
So in this, then, are you supporting first responders before they get, like, is this something that then will always be available, like, long before they get to a point?
yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what I'm doing right now is in talking about this, is creating some awareness about this. And what do we need to do to fix these situations so they don't happen again? People have asked, what would be different? What would I have done differently?
Yes.
How would I have not ended up in the situation that I was? And had I had some education awareness early on in my career,
Mhm.
huge.
Yeah.
That's how you break stigmas, is you education. People, I think, fear things that they don't understand or don't know enough about. And so we need to educate these people early on. We need to equip them with a skill set,
Mm.
very much like I think the detachment technique can offers, the ability to calm yourself in situations, the ability to process some of these traumas. That's important. That's really, really important. And get these conversations going like this, Cindy, like being able to talk to you on your wonderful podcast, and hopefully help somebody else out. Or I think, yeah, and break some of those cultural norms that exist. But it needs to start early before it's too late. We're very much a reactionary society, unfortunately, especially with mental health, right?
Yes.
We wait for things to happen. And I've lost 5 coworkers that I know in my career, my 20-year career, to suicide because of this. So that's too much. It's I think we're asking too much of these people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And so thank you.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think I'm humbled by this whole conversation and in awe, and we're all so grateful that you are here.
Oh, I appreciate
And look forward to all of the things that are still to come. Where can people connect with you?
For sure. And I honestly, I'm saying this, I'm happy to have these conversations. I've really enjoyed people sharing their stories with me, and I've been humbled by these stories. And like you said before, Cindy, at the beginning of our conversation, is you had no idea what I was going through. I have no idea what some of these people are going through. And so people have been vulnerable with me and shared their stories. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is we really don't know what people are going through.
Yeah.
Right. I love that slogan, Belle. Let's talk. Let's have a conversation. Let's start talking about having these difficult conversations. So I urge people to reach out to me. You can reach me at, we have this amazing website up, the Detachment Technique, www.detachmenttechnique.com. And I can be reached at jeff@detachmenttechnique.com. And so send me an email. I'd love to hear your stories. I'd love to be, if I can help out, or we can help out, our organization can help out in any way. I'd love to be a part of that. I really would. Yeah, anything that I can do.
I truly, I do think that's so true, because I've seen you through this whole, like, for the last few years too. And to be honest, it's like, see, I always say it's like the little windows of Instagram, and you see like one little window in, and I think back and go, like, could I have helped Jeff? Or like from the outside, I would have had no idea that you were struggling or had anything going on. And so I look around and think, I wonder who else is struggling, right? Like,
Yeah, that's so true, Cindy. And it's kind of scary to think about, right? Is
yes,
think who else is struggling? We don't know. And I think, but by having these conversations, maybe it might push someone in the right direction to speak about it
yes,
and say, listen, if Jeff can talk about it,
yes,
then maybe I can talk about it too. So
yes,
that's my intention, because when I started, we didn't talk about it.
yeah,
We didn't. And the good paramedics were the stoic ones that didn't say anything. And
yeah,
that's not normal. That's wrong. We're knowing that gets you into a lot of trouble. So I'm urging people to talk about it, whether it be with me or a friend or family, whatever it may be, reaching out to a professional. Just do it, because it's getting your life back is so much different. 14 months later, the way I view my life and what I'm grateful for, and the people in my life and all that kind of stuff, is so different than I felt 14 months ago when I was standing on the edge of that bridge. And so that's what I want to urge people, is to, whether it's like a slight glimmer of hope, please hang on to it. It's suicide is what do they talk, like an impulsive decision you do. It's a short-term or long-term solution to I'm going to get that saying wrong. What is it, Cindy? Forget
I,
it. We'll edit that out. We'll edit that saying out. But you know what I mean? It's often an impulsive decision that,
yes,
because you can't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And I
yeah,
get that. I've been there, but
yeah.
now I'm seeing that light. I'm experiencing it. And I'm extremely grateful for it.
And I always say too, like, that people want to push trauma away. And really what I believe you're doing with this is you're opening a space for trauma, so that you no longer have to push it away. You have welcomed your trauma in a way that you've made space for it where you feel safe with it, so that you understand yourself fully, but you're not scared of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you put it in a great way. I think you're absolutely right. We cannot get rid of trauma. You can't, right?
No.
Especially for first responders, that's part of your job, is to see these things. And unfortunately, in Canada, we have a very high percentage of our general population that struggles with post-traumatic stress as well too. And it's things like, things that we see on the news, vicarious trauma, being exposed to, some of the atrocities that are happening in the world, sexual assault, domestic violence, those kind of things put people at risk for developing PTSD. So
Yes.
you're right. We cannot, it's part of, unfortunately, it's part of our lives, but we need to learn how to deal with it and accept it, so it doesn't take over, consume our lives like it has done for so many people.
Yes.
We don't have to look too far. We can look to the downtown east side and see people that are struggling with trauma,
Yeah.
right? Those are people that are, I can't imagine what they've gone through in their lives, and
I
they're
know.
dealing with it in the only way they know how to, and that's symptom relief from self-medication. So yeah, I think we need to figure out healthy ways to deal with this stuff. It starts early. It starts before we have a problem. And that I'm really passionate about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
And
thank you.
thank you for the amazing work you're doing. And I'm
No,
super excited.
I
to hear
know.
more about the energy. And I love that. I love the fact that you're doing that. I couldn't think of a better person to be doing this too.
Oh, good.
So
I,
yeah,
I, I love that you're like, even that, knowing that you are now open to these conversations, right?
absolutely.
I know, it's so good. So
I
good.
know, and it is, and I think that having some alternative options is really important too. The conventional treatment for PTSD is the success rates aren't great for people that go through conventional treatment, including like medication, as I
Yes.
talk about cognitive behavioral therapy. EMDR therapy is another form of treatment. Conventional conventional treatment is not as successful as we'd like it to be, but I think people need to have other options out there too, right?
Yes.
Try other things. It's don't give up, and that's the biggest thing, because I was ready to give up,
Yeah.
but having this alternative option, and trust me, I am one of the biggest skeptics out there, and
Yeah.
so that's why I love things that surprise me and change the way I view things. So.
I know. I love like the fact that you were talking about EFT tapping.
I know. Well, and so what's bizarre, like you look at, this is being used in the US military is using this as a,
Yes.
so, just when you start thinking about how like, okay, this is totally hokey, well, think that they're, some of the toughest guys in the world and women are in the world are using this as a technique
Yes.
to calm their nervous systems before they go into some very scary situations. So I think we need to try these things.
Yeah.
They're effective. I've taken medication. Like, I'm not saying that we don't need medication in this world, please. I'm not saying that, but some of these medications that I've taken for depression and anxiety have had some significant side effects.
Yes.
There's so if you can do things without having to take invasive treatments, like having to take medications long term and that sort of thing, build a healthy skill set before things get where they shouldn't be. All the best, if you tapping, I would have tried that early, sure, as an option, right? Sure. Instead of taking medication, if I could use EFT as a skill set to help deal with some
Yeah.
anxiety, absolutely. I think it's important.
I think too, like I now see it for my kids. And Chase well, he's not going to hear this, so it's okay. But if he can't sleep, he'll ask me to send him Reiki. And I love that he's just like, I can't sleep, and he's overwhelmed or
Yeah.
anxious. And so he'll just say, could you please send me Reiki? And
Yeah.
I'm like, sure. And so the fact that we can open it up to them to know that, that they, when they're younger and they're like, just, could you just send me that? And like in 5 minutes, he's out. I'm like, yeah, of course. Like that their anxiety doesn't have to build like we did. Like, oh my
Yeah.
God, like, no, just try tapping, try this. Oh yeah, you need some Reiki. Okay, you know how to ask for it. And then you can go off to sleep. Like that they don't have to be sitting in a room for hours feeling like that paranoia that we often would get, right?
Absolutely. And being able to self advocate as well too is huge, is to
Yes,
be able to in that situation go, I need this.
I
This is
need
what I need
this.
this.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
This is what I can do for myself too, right? This
yes.
is another, that's a big thing too. And please, can you send me
Send me
something? You
something.
need to send me something tonight, because
Yes.
I struggle with sleep. So
Yeah, I'll send you
I
some
yeah,
Reiki.
absolutely. I'm
Yes,
not afraid to say that. So tell
yes,
Chase that I have no problem saying that.
yes,
Jeff has trouble sleeping.
yes,
But I think that that's super important. I think that's great
yes,
that you're developing a vocabulary too at an early age
yes.
to be able to say this. So, a lot of like, I didn't know how to say that I was anxious, or I didn't know how to, one of those things, and being able to, has been really powerful for me too, is being able to, say where I can feel anxieties, I can feel it in my chest or feel it in my neck, or quite
Yes,
often that takes away, part of that energy as well, is just being able to name it and know exactly what it is and what you're feeling, and
yes.
how to get help in those situations. Super important. Yeah.
So good. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but I know that's something even like for you and Leanne, there's a whole thing now where I mean, I'm not just going to talk about your love languages, but they talk about how like the new love languages are to be able to express your trauma to your partner, so your partner can understand your trauma better, and also to be able to explain your nervous system better, so that you can be able to say like, right now I'm feeling this, so that I need to step back, and to be able to express that to your partner, so that you two can actually understand each other, so that if your partner's yelling, that might be triggering something for you, so that you don't get too in each other's face, that you can just say, you know what, right now,
Yeah.
I'm breathing heavy, I'm feeling anxious, and you can express your body to the other person so
Mhm.
that you can actually then take a step back and just say, okay, this is what's happening. And so that you actually, it's more than just like, I need touch. It's that you actually can express deeper what's happening for yourself.
That's amazing. I think of, how this disease is sort of um, bled into my relationships, and how I've struggled with even being able to express myself to my family, my
Yes.
kids, and kids will be kids. And but dealing with some of the challenges, as a parent who's struggling with PTSD, and to communicate with others and tell them what they're feeling. So
Yeah.
I love that you said that, and it goes both ways, because I know how
Yes.
damaging this has been on my family, and so what they've experienced and how I've made them feel in some of these situations. So I love that. If we can you imagine the hours of fighting that and
Yes.
arguing that we would wait that we've wasted, right? If we can
Wasted.
tell people
Yes.
what we're feeling.
Yes.
And
Well, and another big thing I say, see, I'll end it on this, but
yeah.
is I always say to have a journal. And I say this with my kids too, because sometimes the words you're saying are not truthfully what you want to say. And so when we get heated, I always just say, wait, grab your journal, and then go into separate rooms, because sometimes when you write out what it is, it's about like the dishwasher, or it's about something else, right? Like so when you start to just write like, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm this, and then just come back 10 minutes later, and really it's like, I actually am sad, or I'm lonely, or I'm this,
Yeah.
or I'm that. And by the time you get to the 7th page of what you've been scribbling, you're like, I'm not mad at all. I just need a hug.
That's right.
Right. And so
I
to
love it.
journal it out, like when you really are in those stages, I just say, let's everybody take 5 minutes and write what were the mad words in the page in here. When we come back 7 minutes later, we'll realize it's
Wow,
really
this
not.
all, yeah, and I love that. I journal every day, so that's
Yeah.
part of my thing. It's been hard to get into, but it's something that it's been
Once you're
really,
there, it's
yeah,
good.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I got a
Oh.
little lock and key that goes with it too. It's really fun. So, yeah. Uh,
Uh, well, thank you,
yeah.
Jeff. That's so
Oh,
good. I
this is a great
really appreciate it.
conversation, and like yeah, I think how great this is. Like who
I
would have
know.
thought high school that we would be having this conversation
I know.
30 years
I know.
later? So I
I
love it.
know.
I love the work that you're
Love it.
doing, everything about it. So
Oh,
thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, I'm gonna pause this.